Hello, welcome to my project, The Changing Post-Dobbs Landscape of Reproductive Healthcare in the United States. For my project, my final project here at ASU for the Masters of Social Justice and Human Rights program, I wanted to focus on the real-life advocacy work that I've done and marry that with the research that I've done throughout my time as a student here at ASU. So, in 2022, the United States Supreme Court held a landmark decision known as the Dobbs v. Jackson Hole Women's Health Organization, which sparked the overturning of Roe v. Wade. Essentially, this meant that the power of restricting or protecting abortion care and reproductive health care was left solely up to the states. At that time, I lived in New Mexico. New Mexico was one of the states that had the fewest regulations that limit reproductive health care. And so because of that, I thought, reproductive health care is protected in the state of New Mexico. Unfortunately, that wasn't the case. In 2022, in my city of Clovis, New Mexico, I found myself joining and helping steer a local nonprofit advocacy group that started because we were fighting back against anti-abortion ordinances that were brought forth across the state of New Mexico and started in our town of Clovis, New Mexico. How did this happen? First thing I want to talk about is the anatomy and the timeline of a post-Dobbs decision town and how that, kind of like a real-life case study of how the Dobbs decision is directly impacting various cities and how the policies that are brought forth can create this murky legal landscape across the United States. It's not so cut and dry. So the first thing that's worth noting is that the first kind of step that I've noticed is that a conservative Texas lawyer, Jonathan Mitchell, carefully crafts anti-abortion ordinances. And then what he does next is really interesting. Traditionally, he doesn't bring forth these ordinances himself. He gives those ordinances to organizations, most notably the Right to Life organization, which I will show you guys down here. And he takes these individuals, arms them with this ordinance, and empowers them to go around to different cities and towns across New Mexico. And in particularly, ours was targeted because our town was on the border of Texas and New Mexico. So once the Right to Life is armed with those ordinances, they go into churches, they hold rallies, and they empower the citizens and arm them with the ordinance to go into their city and county governments to bring forth the local ordinances so that they can get them the restrictions in place for each city and town. Right here is an actual copy of the first version of the ordinance that was drafted by Jonathan Mitchell, the Texas lawyer I mentioned earlier, and was actually brought forth in our city commission to try and restrict abortion care in our city. And what happened is myself and numerous other individuals, attended a meeting just because we kind of heard what was going on. Half of us didn't even know each other. And we decided to fight back. We decided to stand up against the Right to Life, Jonathan Mitchell, and our local city government, and implore them to not pass the anti-abortion ordinance in our city because it directly went against state law. Ultimately, after several meetings, our city did pass the anti-abortion ordinance. But what's interesting is that because they did that, we were able to file a brief with the state of New Mexico, which you'll find right here, which details the harms that the local ordinances have on our residents. And it supports the New Mexico Attorney General's lawsuit for our city, challenging the ordinances as unconstitutional. Another thing that happened from this, and I'll move over here to future implications, is members of our advocacy group, Eastern New Mexico Rising, were able to participate in the legislative session last year, or actually this year still, almost last year, as we're approaching 2024. And one of the things that we wanted to let our local policymakers and our governor know is that we needed to be careful about the wording of the bill. We needed to make sure that the bill prohibited public bodies and local municipalities from denying or restricting an individual's right to use or refuse reproductive health care. And that's exactly what happened with House Bill HB 7, which is called the Reproductive and Gender Affirming Healthcare Act. We're extremely proud of this. I also wanted to draw attention to the recent 2023 election that we had, where several states decided to protect the reproductive health care as well. Again, it's important to note the future implications of this should dictate what happened in New Mexico as well. Although these states say that they're protecting reproductive health care, do they have the same bills in place that are going to protect citizens from public bodies and local municipalities from denying or restricting their right to reproductive health care? Right here, I wanted to show a picture of our steering committee, which is amazing. We have a website that we started, Eastern New Mexico Rising. And then there are several articles, some national, some local, down here that dictate and kind of give you guys an idea of all the things that we did for about a year to try to get HB 7 passed. So we started off as people who didn't know each other, didn't really know anything about what kind of policies were even in place in our city, to local average citizens joining the fight, to participating in the legislative session and ultimately helping draft legislation that protected our citizens. I wanted to really draw attention to that because it's very important. It's very important moving forward that we need to pay attention to what our local governments, what happens in our local governments, even if things are protected at the state level. I won't go into too much detail regarding the theoretical framework, because if you've gotten this far, you've read through that. But I did want to touch on one of the biggest pieces that I feel are driving this whole, and this is where the research and advocacy section kind of marry together. A lot of the research that I've primarily conducted has been around the Christian nationalist influence on reproductive health care across the United States. And the reason why this became of particular interest to me was just by simply witnessing it. So by going to these city commissions and witnessing the right to life and seeing Jonathan Mitchell, the high-powered attorney in Texas, arming these people with this information and this power, how they were able to utilize their ideology to operate and convince whole cities and governments to pass laws that would ultimately, get them sued by their own states. It was very interesting to me to understand that and what was the motivation behind that. So that's where most of my research has come into play, is through themes that like Christian nationalism and how the Christian faith plays a central role in the identity and policies of the state. And that their ideology believes that the nation's laws should align with the Christian doctrine. And also themes like patriarchy, the social system in which men hold the primary power in the roles of leadership and women are largely excluded. In this instance, that comes in the form of the patriarchal social control, policing of women's bodies and their sexuality through implementing, strict reproductive healthcare ordinances across states. Pronatalism, a central ideology in that Christian nationalists use to promote anti-abortion stances. And they use that to influence various aspects of public policy. And we also have necropolitics, because many of these ordinances criminalize average citizens who help or citizens who seek and obtain an abortion across the United States. This criminalization usually comes in the form of impacts low income and ethnic minorities the most. The criminalization of abortion disproportionately affects women of color, and the rates of unwanted and unintentional pregnancies are the highest in those who are at the poverty level. This is kind of a form of the anti-abortion politics spearheaded by the Christian nationalists have become a new form of necropolitics, where state authoritarianism and sovereignty lay claim to a woman's bodily autonomy. And one thing I wanted to leave you guys with at the end here, I implore you to make sure that you're paying attention, that you're getting involved, even when it's hard. I want you guys to also, if you have a second, take a look at my speech here that I gave at the Clovis, New Mexico City Commission, where I implored them to please not pass the anti-abortion ordinances in our city. And I really appreciate you guys taking the time today to, hear a little bit about my project and the research that I've done and where my advocacy is going and where it was. Thank you.